If you haven't figured out by now, I love Visual Studio Code. In fact, if you look at some of my original videos from this course back when I first created it, and there's a few videos still around from that time, that I was using Vim a lot. And I've been a Vim user for probably decades now. And that's, as a sysadmin, that was really my thing. I would always have to run stuff on servers and edit files on servers. So I was always using Vim, and I just got used to that. It wasn't really until VS Code. All the other editors I've tried, Atom and all of the other paid editors and things over the years, never really got stuck with any of them until VS Code showed up. So I'm convinced now that for DevOps, and especially for this course, when you're doing Kubernetes and Docker files and you're editing Compose, YAML, and all the things you'll learn about in this course, that the easiest way to do that is in Visual Studio Code for a lot of reasons, most of which are around syntax highlighting, helping you see errors inside of those files when you're typing them out, because it'll look and see if the commands are correct or the things you're doing are correct. And it's just a good buddy while you're learning, as well as just doing your day-to-day job. So let's jump into it. I'm not going to talk a lot about the internals or how to really use it. I just want to make sure that if you're new to Visual Studio Code, that you have a few of the basics that you need to get started, and then the extensions that will really help you in this course. Now, you can just download it from their website, right? That's code.visualstudio.com. You can go there and download it for your local OS. If you're on Windows, you can use the store to download it if you prefer the Windows Store method. You can even run it in a web browser over at vscode.dev, which will just run the exact same app in a browser tab. If you're a GitHub fan and you maybe are going to use it with repositories on GitHub like this course, you could just use it on GitHub. You can type github.dev. It'll give you some information about how to use it inside of repositories right inside your browser with the rest of GitHub. Once you've got it running, regardless of how you want to run it, click the little widget down there and you can log in. Now, logging in is key here because it'll sync all your settings so that you don't have to worry about backing them up, because over time, you're really going to end up with your own custom configuration of VS Code. So why not save those settings securely somewhere so that you can get to them from any machine? So turn on sync and you should be good to go there. Then you'll want to open up this course repository. And once you do, this little pop-up will show up. And this is a feature of VS Code. So I can put in my repository, inside the VS Code directory over here, I can put in an extensions JSON file that recommends extensions for you to use this repository, which is great for courses because now you can just click the install button there, or you can click the show recommendations if you want to see what it's going to install. Now, the first extension I'm going to recommend might be obvious, which is the Docker extension. And what's nice about VS Code is that even if you didn't install my recommended extensions, that it would recommend what it sees on your operating system there. It'll recommend. So when you open up a Docker file, it'll say, hey, would you like to install the Docker extension? Or if it sees the Docker binary on your machine, it will even say that. So it will help you along your way. If you have Terraform files or Terraform installed, it might recommend Terraform. Same for Python or development languages. It's pretty quick about that. So just don't sweat installing all the extensions up front if you don't want to. But let me just tell you about this one. The Docker extension, in addition to helping you write the Docker files and Compose files that you will write throughout this course, which when this course was first created, we didn't have that, and it was a little bit harder. You had to go from memory, and you had to spend a lot of time on the Docker documentation. But now we have these extensions in VS Code that will help you see mistakes before you try to run the commands. It'll help advise you on that, as well as it can control Docker from inside VS Code itself. If you'd like to know more about those features, just check out this extension README page for each one of them. The same goes for the official Kubernetes extension. You'll notice that both of these extensions are supported and written by Microsoft. So you'll see the nice little Microsoft logo with the blue checkbox there indicating that it is a legit, safe extension from the makers of VS Code, Microsoft. And just like the Docker extension, I use a fraction of the features here, but I find it very useful. It includes snippets and examples for some of the YAML and configuration files you'll make later in this course, so there's just really no reason not to have it. The next set of extensions that I highly recommend, especially if you think you will use remote servers at all during this course, and we will have some of the lectures talk about remote servers and have you set them up if you can. But when you want to run remote servers, the remote development extensions from Microsoft are also extremely handy. These are one of the few extensions that I use almost weekly. If there's ever a need for me to have a remote server, usually just for testing something or trying something out or building another lecture in my course, I'm often using these remote extensions. And essentially, there's the main remote development extension right here, and it will install at least 3 others. It's sort of a meta extension. It'll install the remote containers, the remote SSH, and then the remote WSL that it talks about in this main remote development extension. So if you're on Windows and using WSL, like I recommend, then this will automatically say, hey, would you like to enable the WSL feature? What this allows you to do in WSL, because WSL is a Linux VM running inside Windows, is it allows you to run VS Code on your Windows machine, and it can see the files natively inside of your WSL Linux machine. The same is true for the remote SSH. Anything remote, a server over the internet that you have SSH to, it will treat it almost like you're developing on your local system with a local Linux shell, but you're really using a server over the internet, and your code would be stored on that server, and it's running all the commands on that server. So it's really slick. It also allows me to do things like run VS Code in a browser on an iPad. And finally, it will also install the container version of remote, where it'll allow you to run your app code or any of the code you want to mess with inside a container anywhere Docker's running. And once you have this installed, you'll see a little box down here on the very bottom left with a couple of greater than, less than arrows. And if you were to click that, it's going to give you the drop-down menu for connecting to the remote host or doing any of the other things the remote features can do. And this one's a bonus. Technically, you don't need this at all for this course, but if you happen to be lucky enough to work in a team, or maybe you're taking this course with someone else that's also learning Docker or Kubernetes, and you'd like to pair at all on this course, or you're in a team that you want to do code pairing, or you might need to do code pairing, or just simply show off your code to someone else live, get the LiveShare official extension from Microsoft. There's a lot of ones that have similar names, but you want to get the LiveShare one from Microsoft because this one uses a secure tunnel up to Microsoft Cloud servers to allow you to mutually authenticate with someone else, and then you essentially can just share your repository through VS Code, and you can both edit on the files like you were sitting on the same machine. You can actually see where each person is writing, like a Google Doc, and you can move around the files and then tell everyone else to come look at your file. It's actually super neat. It makes for great demos, especially like if you're live streaming or making YouTube videos like I do. It's pretty slick. So I recommend trying that out next time you need to share some of your code with a friend. And that's it. You've got your Docker, you've got your VS Code, you've got the repository. Let's get into talking about the features of Docker. Coming up next, running and managing containers.